You haven't seen the sun in 11 generations. Nobody alive has. The word for blue still exists in your language, but no one can agree on what it means. Children draw the sky as a flat gray ceiling because that's what it is. And somewhere in a tunnel school, a teacher is explaining to a room full of pale, wide-eyed kids that their ancestors once lived on a surface. An open, roofless world with no walls above them. And half the class doesn't believe her. Not because she's wrong. Because the idea of standing under nothing is so terrifying that their bodies physically reject it. Their heart rates spike. Their hands shake. They are afraid of the sky and they have never seen it. That's not metaphor. That's biology. And it would begin within the first generation. Humans move underground permanently. That's the only rule we're changing. Everything else, physics, biology, history, stays exactly where it is. Here's how fast you'd stop being you. Within 3 generations, roughly 75 years, the human body would begin measurable biological adaptation to permanent subterranean life. Not evolution in the full Darwinian sense. That takes tens of thousands of years for major structural changes. But epigenetic shifts, developmental plasticity, and intense selection pressure in a closed environment would start producing visible, testable differences in human physiology within decades. A 2019 study from the University of Copenhagen showed that Tibetan highlanders developed measurable genetic adaptations to low-oxygen environments in under 3,000 years. One of the fastest documented cases in human history. Underground, with constant artificial light, limited UV, and restricted air circulation, the pressure would be faster, harsher, and stranger. And that's just the body. The body is the easy part. What happens to culture, memory, identity, reproduction, law, war, territory? That's where it becomes something you genuinely wouldn't recognize as human civilization. Let's start with the body, because the body goes first. Within months of permanent subterranean living, vitamin D production collapses. The skin makes vitamin D when UVB radiation hits a cholesterol compound called 7-dehydrocholesterol in the upper layers of the epidermis. No sunlight, no UVB, no vitamin D. Full stop. Within 6 months, bone density begins to decline. Within 2 years, rickets rates in children would be endemic. Softened bones, bowed legs, deformed pelvises. A 2014 review in the journal Nutrients confirmed that populations with chronically low vitamin D show skeletal deformity within a single generation when supplementation is unavailable. Underground, supplementation means artificial UV lamps, fortified food, or synthesized vitamins. If the civilization maintains industrial chemistry, this is solvable. If it doesn't, and we'll get to why it might not, the skeleton of the underground human begins changing within 20 years. Eyes adapt next. Not overnight, but measurably. In constant low or artificial light, the human eye begins developmental changes across generations. Myopia rates climb first. This is already documented on the surface. A landmark 2015 study in the journal Nature estimated that by 2050, nearly half of the global surface population would be myopic, driven largely by reduced outdoor light exposure in childhood. Underground, with zero natural light, that timeline accelerates violently. Within 3 to 4 generations, severe myopia becomes the baseline. Within 10 generations, the eye may begin structural changes. Larger pupils to capture more light, altered rod-to-cone ratios favoring dim light sensitivity. This isn't speculation. Cave-adapted species across the animal kingdom, the Mexican blind cavefish, the Texas blind salamander, the olm of Slovenia, show exactly this trajectory. Larger light-gathering structures first, then, over deep time, eye reduction, or loss entirely. Humans wouldn't lose their eyes in 500 years, but the eyes they had at year 500 would not be the eyes they started with. Skin pigmentation fades. Melanin production is metabolically expensive. In an environment with zero UV radiation, there is no selective advantage to producing it. Within 10 to 15 generations, underground populations would trend dramatically toward reduced pigmentation. Pale, almost translucent skin. similar to what we see in deep cave fauna. The underground human at generation 20 looks noticeably different from any surface population that ever existed. Now, forget the body for a second. Think about what a single day looks like. You wake up, but not to morning. There is no morning. Circadian rhythm, the internal clock that governs sleep, hormone release, digestion, mood, immune function, is calibrated by sunlight. Specifically by the blue wavelength light that hits specialized cells in the retina, called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Without that signal, the circadian clock drifts. NASA studies on astronauts aboard the International Space Station, who experience 16 sunrises per day, showed persistent sleep disruption, cognitive impairment, and mood instability despite rigorous artificial lighting schedules. Underground, the effect would be worse because the environment offers zero solar cues. Communities would need to impose artificial light-dark cycles and enforce them. Sleep becomes a civic function, not a personal one. The government tells you when it's night. If that sounds dystopian, it is. Food production reshapes entirely. No photosynthesis underground unless you build full-spectrum artificial grow lights powered by geothermal or nuclear energy. Without that, the underground diet consists of fungi, root vegetables harvested from hydroponic systems, farmed insects, and, if protein becomes scarce enough, each other. This is not a throwaway line. The Donner Party, the Andes flight disaster, the siege of Leningrad. Surface history already shows that when caloric intake drops below survival thresholds in enclosed populations, cannibalism follows. Underground, enclosed by rock on every side, with no surface supply chain, the threshold arrives faster. It becomes a question the civilization has to answer formally. Under what conditions is it permitted? That's a law someone has to write. Here's where it stops being a survival story and starts being a political one. Territory underground is not measured in land. It's measured in tunnel volume. Livable space has to be carved, reinforced, ventilated, and lit. Every cubic meter of habitable space costs labor, materials, and energy. This means space is the primary currency, not money, not gold, volume. The groups that control the excavation machinery control expansion. The groups that control ventilation, shafts, control who breathes. This is not metaphor. In the silver mines of Potosi in colonial Bolivia, Spanish colonial administrators controlled indigenous labor by controlling airflow into the tunnels. Workers who disobeyed had their ventilation reduced. The mine killed an estimated 8 million people over 3 centuries. Underground civilization would rediscover this mechanism within the first decade, because the physics of enclosed spaces makes it inevitable. Whoever controls the air supply controls everything. War underground is not like war on the surface. There are no flanking maneuvers, no cavalry charges, no air support. Every conflict is a siege. You block the tunnel, you cut the air, you wait. Poison gas becomes the dominant weapon, not because it's the most lethal, but because in an enclosed tunnel system with limited ventilation, a small amount of gas travels farther, lingers longer, and kills more efficiently than any projectile. World War I already proved this on the surface. The Battle of Messines in 1917 saw British forces detonate 19 underground mines beneath German lines, killing an estimated 10,000 soldiers in seconds. Underground civilization wouldn't need to invent new weapons. The tunnel is the weapon. Borders become airlocks. Immigration means someone drills into your tunnel from theirs. Every nation is a sealed system. Diplomacy happens through solid rock. The political geography of the underground world doesn't look like a map. It looks like a circuit board. Nodes connected by narrow, defensible passages, each one a choke point, each one a potential kill zone. And now the part that changes everything permanently. Within 10 generations, or roughly 250 years, underground cultures begin to diverge. Not just politically, linguistically, biologically, psychologically. On the surface, human populations stayed genetically connected through migration, trade, conquest, and intermarriage over tens of thousands of years. Underground, each tunnel system is a sealed population. Gene flow between groups drops to near zero. Genetic drift accelerates. In population genetics, this is called the founder effect. A small, isolated population accumulates genetic differences rapidly because random variation has nowhere to dilute. The Amish population of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, descended from roughly 200 founders in the 18th century, shows elevated rates of specific genetic conditions including Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome and maple syrup urine disease. Not because of any environmental pressure, but simply because the founding population was small and isolated. Underground, every tunnel nation is a Lancaster County. Every sealed community becomes its own genetic experiment. By generation 20, 500 years, the underground human is a different organism in every measurable way. Paler, wider-eyed. Probably. Caloric restriction and low vitamin D correlate with reduced average height across populations. Psychologically adapted to enclosed spaces in ways that would make surface environments genuinely traumatic. Culturally unrecognizable, because culture tracks environment, and the environment has no sky, no horizon, no seasons, no weather. The words for wind, rain, sunrise, sunset, horizon, cloud, they either change meaning or disappear. Language tracks the world it describes. Underground, the world is walls. Now let's be honest about what we don't know. The speed of biological adaptation is estimated, not certain. We have strong data on epigenetic changes over 3 to 5 generations and solid evolutionary biology for longer timescales. But we don't have a real case study of a large human population sealed underground for centuries. The closest analogs are isolated island populations, submarine crews on extended deployment, and cave-adapted animal species, all of which inform the projections, but none of which are exact parallels. The psychological projections, agoraphobia becoming baseline, circadian collapse, cultural divergence, are grounded in documented human responses to isolation, confinement, and sensory deprivation, but scaled up in ways that involve real uncertainty. The political projections about air control and tunnel warfare draw on historical examples that are well documented, but extrapolating them to a permanent civilization involves choices about which pressures dominate. This is rigorous reasoning, not prophecy. Here's the part most people get wrong about this scenario. Everyone assumes the underground world would be desperate to get back to the surface. That generation after generation would dream of the sun, tell stories about the sky, and work toward returning, but the opposite is almost certainly true. By generation 5, roughly 125 years, no living person has ever seen the surface. It exists only in stories, and stories change. By generation 10, the surface is mythology. By generation 20, it's religion. The sun becomes a god, or a monster, or a metaphor. And the people who suggest actually going up there are not visionaries. They are heretics, because the underground world is home. It's the only world anyone has ever known. The ceiling is the sky, the tunnel is the road, the chamber is the city. And the idea of standing under an infinite empty void with no roof, exposed to radiation from a burning star, with wind, air that moves on its own without machinery, touching your skin, that is the most terrifying thing the underground human can imagine. They would not want to come back. We already know this is true, by the way. Not because we've lived underground, but because we've already watched human beings adapt to environments that would horrify their ancestors and call them normal. Children raised in windowless high-rise apartments in Hong Kong, in submarine quarters, in Arctic research stations during polar night, every study shows the same result. Within 2 generations, the abnormal becomes invisible. Humans don't adapt to their environment and remember what they lost. They adapt and forget. That's not a bug in human cognition. It's the feature that kept us alive for 300,000 years. And underground, it would erase the surface from memory as cleanly as if it never existed. You haven't seen the sun in 11 generations. But that's fine, because as far as you know, there is no sun. There never was. Next video, there's one version of survival that's worse than being trapped underground. What if you couldn't die? But everyone could still kill you?